Hi, welcome to this SimplyMaya tutorial. This is going to be a project-based tutorial on creating this shot. So as you can see with this shot, we have here some Maya dynamics on the rings, we have some keyframe animation, we use depth of field, we also use a few materials. Now this tutorial is intended to be a project-based look at how to create something like this. This is a banner I made for the SimplyMaya site to advertise a practical shading tutorial. So we're going to take you through the process of how we did it. So to start off with, we're just going to import a glass object. I have one here. This is a very simple low polygon glass object. There's hundreds of tutorials on the net for how to create this. We'll also include it with the tutorial. So the first thing we want to do is we need to get from our shot the rings in the glass. So there's two ways of doing this. I can create some rings and spend half an hour placing them in the glass, making sure they don't intersect with each other, or I can use my dynamic simulation to do this, which is going to be quite a bit faster. So I'm just going to create a bunch of rings. So we'll go up to Create, Polygon Primitives, and I'm looking for a pipe. So, okay, this should be about right. Move that out here. Okay. Alright, and that's kind of the size and thickness I'm looking for. You can obviously play around. You don't have to put rings in the glass. This simulation will work with, well, anything you could possibly put in a glass. So I'll just rotate this a little bit. I'll turn on smooth preview so I can get a better look at it. That seems fine. Now I'm going to want about 8 to 10 rings in this glass. So I'm just going to select this, and it's important that we select this and duplicate it before we start putting any dynamics on it, because if you were to put a rigid body on this and then duplicate it, you'd end up with 6 or 7 objects, 8 to 10 objects, all with the same rigid body connected, and this makes Maya extremely unhappy. So I'm going to select this and press Ctrl D to duplicate it, and I'm just going to do this 5 or 6 times. I just open my outliner here. You'll see I have 7, 8. 8 is about enough, I think. So now I'm just going to move these around a little bit so they're separated. Doesn't really matter. We're going to let the dynamic simulation take care of where they end up in the glass. Okay, so there I have my objects. Now I just need to place them all above the glass, because they will need to drop into the glass, of course. Just go to a 4 view here, get a better look. Right, so we get them around over the glass. Now, it's also important that these don't intersect with each other before we start the simulation. So I'll just spend a second here moving these around a tad. Doesn't really matter how high up or low down they are, as long as they don't intersect with each other. Also want to give them a slightly different angle of rotation, so when they fall into the glass they make a nice messy pile, as opposed to all being just stacked neatly one on top of each other, which is not really something you'd see in real life. So okay, I'll work with the side view a minute, and we'll just rotate a few of these around different positions. Okay, make sure we have no intersections. Just do a little more rotating. This one's a little close. Oops. Okay, that's looking pretty jumbled enough for our purposes. Now, one important thing before we get into any Maya dynamics, what we're going to need to do with these objects is remove the history from them and freeze the transformations. So we'll just go to Edit, Delete by Type, History, and then Modify, Freeze Transformations. We want all of our values for Translate, Rotate, and Scale back to 0. This is because if you do a dynamic simulation with Maya and you have various different values here, it will take it longer to calculate, and also sometimes it will throw a bit of a hissy fit. Okay, now for the fun bit, the dynamics. So we want all the objects in the glass and we want them all randomly placed, but we don't want to take the time to actually do it by hand. So we're going to select our objects. I'll go to my dynamics shelf, and all of these need to be rigid bodies, active rigid bodies. So I'll just click here. If we'll go back to our single view with the outliner, you will now see each one of these has its own rigid body assigned. So we'll select our glass, we'll make it a passive body. Okay. Now if I play this simulation, nothing will happen. This is because our scene has no fields, no forces in it. So I need gravity here. So what I need to do again is go and select all of these, just Shift Select. Make sure I have them all. And then gravity. Okay, all of these, as you can see, now have a gravity field. Now, if you missed one, you can select it, Control select the gravity field, go to your Dynamics menu, hit Fields, Affect Selected Objects. So if you did miss one, don't panic. Right, now when I press play in our simulation, just give us a few more frames and turn this on to X-ray. You'll see all the rings drop nicely into the glass. Okay, that's about what we wanted. Nice random pattern, they're all in the glass, none of them are intersecting, and this would have taken us a while to do by hand. So now what we want is, unfortunately, if I go backwards here, this is just going to reset our objects. What we want is these objects in the glass, but we don't want to have to run a dynamic simulation, stop it at frame 150, 250 every time. We want these objects to be in this state when we start to tilt the glass. So in order to do this, I'm just going to give this a few more frames. So the rings will finally all settle down in the glass. I'll just press play. Okay, I can still see one still falling. Okay, perfect. I'll stop this at around frame 240. So in order for this to be the initial state of this object, there is quite a simple way of doing it. What we'll do is, again, we'll select all our pipes. I'll just Shift Select all our what will eventually become our shiny rings, and I'll go up to rigid and passive bodies, my mistake solvers, and I'll set for selected. So this will set all of these pipes, all of these rings, to this initial state. Now when I rewind, as you can see, this is the initial state of our objects. Now at this point, I'm actually going to delete all of the dynamics things from Maya, because I'm going to tilt the glass with a keyframe animation as opposed to a dynamics one. So we're going to clean up all this dynamic stuff. We no longer need it. The last thing we want when we're trying to put a keyframe animation together is a load of Maya dynamics flying around all over the place, slowing us down. So there is an easy way of doing this again. We're just going to delete all of the rigid bodies. In fact, I can just select all these and go up to Modify, Delete by Type, Edit, Delete by Type, Rigid Bodies, and that will get rid of them all. I'll also get rid of the passive body on the wine glass. It's no longer necessary. Okay, gravity field also no longer necessary. So now when I press play, nothing will happen, and our rings are sat nicely in our glass. One last thing we need to do before I sign off and finish this part is I need to make sure that all of these rings are set back to 0 here. So modify, I'm going to delete the history from them. So delete by type history. I'm also going to freeze the transformations. This is because when we've done the keyframe animation on the glass, we're going to want to turn these rings back into rigid bodies so we can simulate them falling out of the glass. So again, like we did the previous example, we need Maya to think this is the initial state for these objects, so it keeps it nice and clean. Okay, that's it for this part. I'll see you in the next one. Hi, welcome back to the second part. In this part, we're going to be tipping the glass over onto the floor. So we're going to do this with a simple keyframe animation as opposed to dynamics. I find this is a little faster, and my workflow is all about getting things done as quickly as possible. So we're going to need to create a floor plane for the glass to fall on. So I'll just flip up to a 4 view here. Go to create polygon primitives and just a simple plane. Scale that up so we have something for our glass to land on. There we go. Okay, now we have a floor plane. We need to take our glass, and because I want the glass to fall over on its side, at the moment, if I was to rotate this glass this way, it's going to pivot in the middle, and this is no good for us at all. So I'm going to move the pivot point. So I'm going to select the Move tool, hit Insert, and then move the pivot point. Okay, I'll do this in the side view. So down to the bottom of the glass, and then up to this corner. There we go. That's about good enough. I'm not going to make this exact because the last thing you guys are going to want to do is sit here and watch me fiddle for the next 20 minutes to get the pivot point in exactly the right place. But if we rotate this now, you'll see I can make the glass fall on the floor. Okay. Another thing is, as these are no longer dynamics, they're not flying about all over the place when I move the timeline, which is a good thing, but I don't really want them in shot, so I'm just going to select them and push Control H to hide them. Okay, so now we'll just reset this. Stroke of genius, of course. And I'll just reset the rotation on this. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, so this is going to be our initial state. So I'm going to go to frame 1. I'm going to select this, and I'm going to key. In fact, first I'm going to reset this. So I'm going to freeze its transformation so everything starts off nice and clean. And now I'm going to key this. I'm going to select, key selected. Okay, I'll rotate our glass, move up to, we're going to be running at around 25 frames a second, so I figure it'll probably take 2 seconds for our glass to hit the floor. So I'll move up to frame 50, and I will rotate this glass so it hits the floor. Okay, that's not what I wanted at all. Let me try this in the side view, a little bit more accurate. Okay, there we go. And just make sure that's hit our floor plane. It has. Okay, so I'll just key this one. Key selected. Back to the start frame. Move this to 50 frames so we're not watching hundreds of frames go by that we don't need. Just back to our perspective view. Tilt this a little bit. Get a better shot. And yeah, as you can see, our glass does end up where we want it, and it starts where we want it, but it's not a very natural glass fall to the floor. I mean, if you were to knock a glass over in real life, it might go slowly for the first part until it gets to about here, and then it would fall towards the floor a lot faster than that. So in order to do this, we're going to go up to our rendering editors, and that's general editors, sorry. Animation editors even, and go to the graph editor, and we'll bring this up, And you can see here, this controls our rate of fall. So if I select this one and middle mouse drag, okay, just rewind, and that's pretty much exactly what I'm looking for. I'll just show you a view. I'll scrub through the timeline. Our glass hangs about here. It kind of teeters on the edge and then falls very quickly. But what we do have is, just give us a few more frames to work with. We do have, if a glass was to fall on the table, or whatever this floor plane might represent, we'd need it to bounce a couple of times. So we want it to fall, hit, and then do a couple of tiny bounces. So I'm going to go to frame 50, make a note of where this rotation is, 90.3. I'm going to go to 51. I'm going to move this rotation to, say, 89.3. I'll just knock one off. And this is raise the glass a little bit. I'll set a keyframe here, under rotation, of course. Key selected. And now my glass hits the floor and bounces back up. I'll move to 52. Set the rotation back to 90. Set a keyframe. Key selected. So now you can see our glass falls quickly, hits the floor, bounces back up, and then finally settles down. Now, this is not really designed to be a real world impression. It just gives that little extra added touch of realism. And in fact, I'll probably set this one more time. So I'll just, again, this time I'll set this to a little smaller bounce. So say 89.6. There we go. And key that. Okay, one more frame on. Oh, okay, my mistake. I've actually, yeah, so we hit the floor, we bounce up, and we don't bounce back down because I've set it wrong, because I'm an idiot. So 90.381, sorry, my mistake, 90.381, okay, I'll just rekey that. And now I'll move one on and have it bounce back up and down again. Okay, so here we want it to bounce back up, so we'll try 89.6 again. Key this, and back down to where it originally was. So we'll move one on again, and key that. So, if we play this, you'll see our glass teeter on the edge, and then bounce up and down a couple of times. This mimics a real-world glass fall, in as such as when we finally render out this shot, this glass is going to be from quite a distance away. So we're just trying to give an impression. We're not trying to go for a realistic physical simulation. Right, so there we have our glass. We have the keyframes set up on it. Now if I go to our outliner, we're going to unhide all of our rings. You see them there in the glass. Okay. So what we need to do now is make our rings back into rigid bodies. What this will do is allow us to then have the rings in the glass. We'll make the glass a rigid body, but make it passive, so the glass will fall and the rings will come flying out. Or at least that's the theory. Okay, so select all your rings, rigid bodies. You'll see again they all have a rigid body solver and a rigid body attached to them. We'll select our glass, turn it into a rigid passive body. We'll select our floor plane because we'll want our rings to bounce on the floor. We'll also turn it into a rigid passive body. Then we'll need some gravity back in the scene. So at the moment we have no gravity, so if I play this for you, you'll see the rings just go flying off into the air. Not exactly what we're looking for, because if you'll remember from the previous part, even though we have the gravity, we have to assign the objects we want to it. So I'll select all our rings. And our polygon plane, and the red wine glass, and I'll just go to Fields, Effect Selected Objects. So we'll try playing this back once again. Okay. I've seen what I did there. Sorry, I just need our rings, and I forgot to select the gravity field as well, so I actually affected selected objects with nothing. We'll try this again. Affect selected objects. You'll see here, connect dynamic gravity field to pipe 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. So, now when we play, hopefully you'll get a better result. And you'll see Maya struggling a bit here as it calculates all these dynamics. What we can do to speed this up a tad is turn on Maya's cache, and we don't actually need 150 frames. We'll drop this down to 100, and so we'll go up to here, solvers, memory caching, enable. We'll hit play. Okay, now the next time this simulates, it'll be faster. Right, as you can see, our rings do indeed fly out of our glass, but the well, let's just say the simulation's not exactly what you'd call very realistic. Our rings are going all over the place. So we're going to go into editing some details on the rigid bodies to give them a little bit more of a little bit more of a realistic look and feel to them. Okay, I'm just going to go over a few settings with you now that you can find in the rigid bodies. The first one I'm going to do is I'm going to change the rigid body on the ground plane because it's far too bouncy. So if we just open our attribute editor here, you can see the attributes you can edit: the static friction, the dynamic friction, and the bounciness. Now all of these values we're going to tweak. The dampening, the impulse position, and the spin impulse are all grayed out because the floor is not an active body. You can only change these values on active rigid bodies. So I'm going to cover these options in depth in the next part, but for just now I'll show you what a difference we can make. We'll set the bounciness of the floor plane down to 0.1, rewind our simulation, and hit play. Now you see we get a lot less bounce on our rings. So already we start to create something a little bit more what we want to see. Now you'll notice one ring shoots completely off in the air. This is because it's this ring here, and it's trapped by the lip of the glass, and the force of the glass bounces it very hard on the floor and then shoots it up in the air. So it might be necessary for us to cheat with this one and set its dampening, its bounce rate, its static friction, or maybe its dynamic friction down a little lower than our other objects, which is a little bit of a cheat, but hey. So that's going to wind this part up. I've intentionally kept these parts short so you can follow along with them easier. In the next part we'll look at tweaking our dynamic simulation, setting our camera up for the right size, and getting a good angle on our shot. See you in the next part. Okay, welcome back to the third part of this tutorial. In this part we're going to spend some time tweaking our dynamic rigid bodies to get a more natural bounce out the glass with the rings. We're also going to look at setting up for the shot, and by this I mean we're going to want to position the camera nicely so when the rings come out of the glass we get a few in shot and a few out of shot. We're going to cover baking out a dynamic simulation into keyframes. This is quite important because the last thing you're going to want is to have to run dynamic simulations all the time. So it's much easier to work if we finally output this whole mess into standard Maya keyframes. So just to note, I've saved every part of this tutorial as well as I've imaginally tightened them parts to. So I'm going to open up where we left off, which was here. As you can see, we have this problem with the one ring bouncing up in the air. So first things first, we'll solve that. So let's just find the little guy here. We'll select its rigid body. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this is I'm just going to set its dampening. So if we set this, the dampening is a very sensitive value. I'll show you. If I set its dampening to 1 and replay the simulation, you'll see what happens. And again, Maya's now brought up a warning telling us we have the cache enabled. So this won't actually resimulate the value we've just put in because it'll be playing back from the cache. So in order to get rid of this, I'll just delete the cache we have. Right. Rewind and play. Now, as you see, our green ring here, it's really been dampened down. It's far, far too damp. So I just put this at a value of 1 to illustrate to you what kind of effect that dampening can have. So if I put this down to 0.2, and again I'll just go and delete the cache. In fact, I'll turn the cache off because we're going to be doing quite a bit of tweaking. So let's just disable the cache for now. Okay, now we'll resimulate. And our ring with the green in has enough dampening on it not to get caught and bounced for miles. Now, what I'd like to see with this shot is some of the rings stay in the glass or around the glass, and some of the rings come flying off the screen. This is because later in this tutorial we're going to use depth of field to give us a little bit more realism. So I'd like to have the rings that shoot past the camera in sharp focus and the rings in the background blurred, and then as the rings come off or shoot past us, the camera will refocus on the glass, and it would be nice to have a nice clean shot of that glass lying on the floor with a couple of rings around it. So in order to achieve this, we're going to go and tweak the rigid bodies to get the kind of simulation we're after. Now, as you've already seen, I've set the dampening on this ring here to 0.2. But really we want to work with all the rings at once, and this is going to be a lot of time in the making if we individually select each rigid body, change its friction, its dampening, its impulse. We're going to be here all day. So a nice feature of Maya is if we go through and shift select all of our rigid bodies. Just take a second here, make sure I have them all. Okay, and then I go up to Window, General Editors, and I'm looking for the attribute spreadsheet. What this has done is this has given me a spreadsheet of all these values together. So at the moment, when our rings bounce on the floor, this is, personally I think, it's a little too bouncy. You know, rings in real life probably wouldn't jump about this far. So I'll just stop that and rewind it. And now rather than going in and setting each bounciness attribute one at a time, which again is going to take time, and it's a little slow way of doing it, I'm going to select all of these here just by drag select and give them a value of 0.3. Now when I press return, you'll see they all go to 0.3. So if I resimulate, yeah, you can see that the bounciness on them has been turned down a lot. Now, what I'd like to do is have them spin a little more. So I'm going to set the spin impulse for X to 0.1. Now, this is also a very sensitive value. If I set this to 10, you'll see an absolute riot go on here. If we just play this back. See, as you can see, this is just amazingly a sensitive value. It's not what we're looking for at all. I just want them to spin a little bit more as they're coming towards the camera. So if I set this spin impulse down to something very low, like 0.1, we should get a little more spin, a little more. Whoops, I'll just rewind that so it starts to recalculate. And there we go. We have a little more spin, a little bit more of what I wanted. Also, I want more rings. I want to guarantee that we have more rings fly past the camera. At the moment, we have too many rings staying in the glass. So, to do this, we'll just stop that here. We will go up to our attribute spreadsheet, and we will take maybe the the dynamic friction down for the first 3 rings to 0.1. And maybe we'll increase the bounciness on those just a tad as well. So if we go to bounciness on the first three and increase it to 0.4, and again this is where the attribute spreadsheet comes in very handy, and we're not going through each one of these one at a time and changing attributes. So we'll just resimulate, and hopefully we'll get a few more rings shoot past us. We do, and just a few stay in the glass. So I'll give us a few more frames to work with so we can get a better look. Let Maya calculate. Okay, yep. That's about what I'm looking for. You'll see some of these now are very spinny, which probably we have our spin impulse turned too high. But when you're doing a dynamic simulation like this, then you have lots of objects flying around. You can spend a very long time tweaking them individually to get exactly what you want. Now, I don't want to do this with you guys watching, because we'll be here all day and you're not going to want to sit here and watch me tweak values for the next 20 minutes. So we're going to call this one, it's about good enough for our purposes at the moment. We're not looking for a physically realistic simulation. We're just looking to make a few shiny rings fly around the place. So, in fact, that spinning impulse control is so sensitive it is up a little high. So I will just tweak it down to maybe 0.01. Okay, and that's really the last change I'm going to make. You can spend a long time playing with these values, but like I say, it's outside the purview of this tutorial. So we'll just resimulate to make sure we're okay. Okay, and that's about what I'm looking for. It's near enough. I'm only going to render out the first 150 frames, so I'll put this back down to 150. Now, what we want to do is we want to bake this simulation out, and all this means is we're going to exchange the dynamic information we have for standard Maya keyframes. It makes it a lot easier to work with. We can do additional tweaks, and we don't have this process of having to calculate dynamics every time we scrub up and down the timeline. And in fact, if I just wanted to jump to frame 50 while we have a dynamic simulation on, I can click it, but nothing will happen. Or Maya will recalculate it and you'll see rings in completely an unexpected position. So the best thing to do once you're happy with your dynamic simulation is to actually bake it out into a keyframe animation. And we're going to do that. We'll go back to frame 1. I'll just close these down. And what we'll do is we'll, again, make sure we have all our active bodies selected. So we're going to turn these from dynamics to keyframes. And to do this, we go to Edit, Keys, Bake Simulation. Make sure I have the options box checked. Now, I want to just go to selected objects. So just these. And basically, I want to get the values we want to bake as keyframes from the channel box. So I'll go to the channel box. And these are the values that I'm going to want as keyframes. We don't do anything with the scale, and we don't do anything here. So I just want these values as keyframes. So if I didn't do this, Maya would keyframe everything, and then we'd have a god-awful mess. So make sure this is sample by 1. This is important for what we're doing at the moment. And just press Bake from the timeline. So it will bake from frame 1 to 150. We can see it, it resimulates, it will bake out. Okay, and there we have it. We still need to remove all the rigid bodies from these. So what I'm going to do is select them all again, Shift Select. In fact, we'll remove the rigid bodies from everything. We don't need them anymore at all. So we go up to Edit, Delete by Type, Rigid Bodies. And what you'll see here is we now have a keyframe set for every single frame on the time slider. This is a bit of a mess. We'll look at how to solve this later. We'll just play this to make sure we're happy with it. Yeah, that's pretty perfect for our purposes. So we'll delete the gravity field. Again, it's no longer necessary. Nothing is happening on a dynamic basis now. It's all pretty much happening by Maya keyframes, which makes it a lot nicer to work with. You can scrub it backwards and forwards, stop it wherever you'd like. There's no more calculating to do, so when we play it, it actually plays in real time. And also, again, we can go in and manually rekey any values that might be a little strange. Something you don't like, you can take it away now. The whole process is a lot easier to work. Now, I'm going to show you how to clean up these keyframes a little bit. Because even though this is much nicer to work with than a dynamic simulation, if you hand this off to an animator now with this ungodly mess on the timeline, they will beat you very thoroughly around the head, and probably rightly so. So we're going to just clean this up a little bit. What I want to do is make sure I have all my pipes selected. I'll go to Window Animation Editors. We'll go back into the graph editor. And if you look here, this is just a complete mess. I mean, it would be next to impossible to work with. You wouldn't want to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all of these points. And again, you can see, you try working with that. And a quick way to get rid of a few of these frames is to go up to Curves. Go up to Resample Curve, select its option box. I'm going to say All. I want this to close this sample, and I'm going to put the time step to 2. This will give us a keyframe every 2 frames, which is still not great, but it's slightly better than 1 every 1, and I'm going to hit Resample. Okay, now if we zoom in, you can see we have lost, well, half of the keyframes, which is probably a good thing. You can run into problems with this. We might have geometry that intersects a little bit. In fact, I think I just saw some there. Yeah, there you go. Because the keyframes have been taken now to every 2 frames, what you'll need to do is go in, manually select all these, move them back in, and rekey them. Now this might seem like a lot of work, but at the end of the day, this sure beats working with thousands of keyframes. However, for our purposes, we're not going to need that, so I'm just going to take this back to where we have a keyframe every frame, as we're not handing it off to anybody else this time. Okay, and that's going to save us a lot of cleanup, again, which is pretty much outside the purview of this tutorial. So, what we've done so far is we've managed to mix dynamics and standard keyframe animation, rigid and passive bodies. We've baked our animation out into keyframes to make it a lot easier to work with, and we've got the kind of look we're going for. So in the next part, we're going to cover shading and lighting this scene and rendering it out. Okay, hope to see you then. Okay, welcome back to our tutorial. In this part, we're going to cover the shading, the lighting, and the rendering out of the scene. Now, to start with, I'd like to say we're going to be using global illumination, final gather, caustics, and image-based lighting to get the look we're looking for. We're not going to cover these in depth. In fact, I'm just going to show you how to get a good setup for this particular scene here. If you'd like to go over these in depth, we will shortly have more in-depth tutorials on these subjects on the site. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the camera up, because if I go to here to show us what our render view would actually see, we're at 640 by 480. And as this animation was originally done as an advertisement for our practical shading tutorial, I'm going to reset the values of the camera. Now this is important because this is obviously going to determine what's in shot and what's out of it. So I go up to our render settings here. And this was a widescreen banner, so I'm going to make it 750 by 350. And as you can see now, this is what we would have in shot, basically. In fact, that's a little too narrow, too wide for my purposes, so I'll turn this back to 300, and you'll see it. Now, this is a narrow focus shot, so I'm just going to tweak this a little bit to get the view I am looking for. Make sure we have enough in shot. Here we go. I want to be a little more down towards the floor, and I don't want to see those rings roll off the floor plane, but I do want to have them shoot past the camera, so let's see what we can do about that. Okay, that's about perfect place for our camera position. We have objects fly past the camera that we can use for tracking, so we'll go back. That's our camera setup. Now I'll just take this off to the side a little bit. Yeah, turn it a little bit. Let's have another look. Okay, that's actually the wrong way around. Let's put it here. Okay, as with anything like this, you can spend a long time tweaking it, and I hope you guys are going to spend some time with your own simulations getting exactly the look you're aiming for. But for our purposes, this is good enough. So first things first, I'm just going to render out a quick test shot here. Okay, extremely ugly. Not at all what you're looking for. Okay, as you can see, our glass is very low polygon. There's a couple of ways to solve this. We can turn on the smoothing by the glass and pressing 3. If we're rendering with Maya software, it's not going to do anything. If we render with Mental Ray, you will immediately see that our object is now smoother. However, it's still not quite smooth enough, and I really don't want to, at this point, turn this into a very high polygon object. So I'm going to use Mental Ray's approximation editor. So to do this, I need to select this item, go up to Window, Rendering Editors, Mental Ray, Approximation Editor. Now I'm going to do this as a subdivision surface, so I'll just create. Okay, you won't see any change in your viewport at all. But if I open up the hypershade, okay, you'll see I have another material here called Glass Lambert. If I just graph this down to our work area, open up this, pop out this one, and this one, you will see here that we have a Mental Ray subdivision approximation. So if I click this, go to the attribute editor, you can tweak it here. I'll just bookmark our camera so we can get a close-up shot. Here we go, I'll get a close-up shot of the edge of the glass. And if I render with Mental Ray now, you'll see that I get a very smooth surface. This is, see, a draft rendering level, so we have no anti-aliasing, or very little. So if I select this again, oops, sorry, back to the hypershade, grab the Mental Ray subdivision approximation, and set this up to, let's say, 4, which is too high for our purposes, but as an example, it will work just fine. Save this render, and I'll re-render. You can see that got a lot smoother. So this is a way to get a smoother geometry in your scene. Sorry, a smoother look to your renders without having massively high polygon geometry. I think I'll leave that value at 3. Okay, so that's sorted that out. We can leave this as a low poly object and render it out with a nice look to it just fine. Now I think here, if we take a look at these rings with a smoothing level of 3, this is probably going to be okay for our purposes. We're not really going to get too up close and personal with these. So, I mean, this is smooth enough as they are. So we don't need to put the subdivision approximation on these as well. Okay, so just go back to our bookmark. Alright, now the next step is we're going to need to light up this scene with something. As I'm going to be using glass and shiny reflective materials on the rings, I'm going to do this with an image-based lighting, and I'm going to use Final Gather and a lighting dome. So first we'll create the lighting dome, so we'll just go up to Create Polygon Primitives, and we'll go to a sphere, obviously, as we're creating a lighting dome. Flick back to my foreview. And there we go. I want it so the floor plane intersects it. In fact, I don't actually need that. I will just scale up our floor plane a bit larger here. Okay, there we go. So, with Final Gather, if you put an ambient color on this, it will actually use it as an indirect light source. So the first thing to do is assign a new material. I give it a standard Lambert, it doesn't really matter. I'll change the color up to white and the ambient color up to here. And if we get a better render view of our glass line on the floor, you will see immediately once we turn on Final Gather, Okay, we turn on final gather. Now for our test renders, I don't really want such a hugely high accuracy. So an accuracy of 25 will do. I'll turn the point interpolation up a bit to deal with some of the speckling. We actually have a free tutorial on the site that covers creating a lighting dome, so if you want more information, check there. But for now, we'll just give this a quick test render. As you can see, this has added a degree of overall illumination to our scene, along with some soft shadows. Again, the anti-aliasing is turned down, so we still have some jagged edges, but it's not really so important for our test renderings. So the next thing I'm going to do is assign a glass material to this. To do this, I just drop down to assign new material. I'm actually going to use a mental ray dielectric material, so I'll just select dielectric material here. I really don't need to tweak any of the values on this. There's no liquid inside the glass, so I don't need to play around with the outside color. The index of refraction is about right for glass, anything from about 1.45 to 1.8 for thicker, heavy crystal. I actually know this glass is made with correct normals. If yours wasn't, if something went wrong in your modeling process, you can always tick ignore normals, and this will take slightly longer to calculate, but you'll get a nicer look. So if we re-render this now, we have blackness because we do not have any reflections or refractions in either final gather or the standard render settings. So in order to fix this, I'll just go up to here. I'll hit the quality tab, and under ray tracing, I'm just going to set this up quite high because we're going to be dealing with reflective materials inside a transparent material. So I'll set this to 5, and I'll also set the max trace depth to the sum of those two, so 10. Under indirect lighting, we're going to do this for our final gather bounces. So I'm going to turn on one final gather bounce to put us more light in the scene. I'm also going to go down to tracing, and I'm also going to set this to 5, and 10. Now, if we keep this for comparison and re-render, you can see we have glass. You can also see it's taken a bit longer to render, and this is quite possibly the world's most boring glass. It looks horrible. This is because we're getting the reflection in the glass from the lighting dome, and the lighting dome is brilliant white. So the first thing we need to do to solve this is to get an environment here for this glass to reflect. I'm going to use image-based lighting for this to add a little bit more illumination to the scene, also to give us some nice reflections and refractions through the glass and on the shiny, eventually shiny objects here. So there's an easy way to do this. You can build your own node and connect it all through the hypershade, but an easier way is just to go into the render settings, go to indirect lighting, scroll up, and you want image-based lighting, so we'll create this. And if we look here in our top view, this has created a big sphere which will be used as the image-based lighting. So under the image name, I'm going to give this a HDR image, which you can find in the assets folder, which I'll just navigate to now. Okay, under the assets folder in the tutorial directory, you'll find something called probe HDR. You'll see this if we zoom out in this view and make it shaded by, sorry, this view maybe is a better option. No? Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, my mistake. You'll see this here as our image-based lighting. I'll just go back to my bookmark. Zoom in on this glass again. It's a little better view. Okay, now if I hit render, you should actually see exactly the same thing because our lighting dome is actually blocking out the image from the image-based render. So in order to fix this, we'll select our lighting dome, which is here. We'll go into its render stats. We want to turn off visible and reflections and refractions. We also want to turn off its primary visibility because we don't want this giant white glare in the background where we don't have any geometry. So if we turn off primary visibility, and I just re-render your glass, okay, now our glass starts to come to life. We have some half-decent reflections and refractions on it. I'll just spin this round from the other side so we can get another look. Okay, there we go. We're starting to look more like glass. I think our overall illumination from both the lighting dome and the image-based lighting is too high. So I'm just going to select the lighting dome here, go to its material attributes, and by turning down its ambient color, I'll actually turn down its light contribution. As for the map, I can see that on this map there is a lot of light, so what I want to do is I want to just grab it and rotate it around in our scene, so maybe we get a little bit more shading. Back to our bookmark view. And again, this is something you'll want to play around with. We're not going to be able to see the image-based lighting background with a shot from the background in the final render, so you don't need to worry about what it looks like too much. But again, this is one of those things that you can spend a long time tweaking. We're just going to get the basics down here. Okay, I've actually tweaked that in the opposite direction I wanted it to be. Now we have too much shading. So again, I'll just spin this a little bit more, see if I can get a nice value. In fact, what I'll do is go into here, under its transformation node, I will set its rotation back to 0, and I'll try just 90 degrees here, and we'll see if that's given us the kind of shot I'm looking for. Again, I should probably bookmark this for you. Here we go. Okay, I like it. I've got a nice level of reflection on my glass. It looks like glass. It's a good starting point anyway. So what we need to do now is we have no shadows and we have no caustics. So in order to have shadows, I'm just going to bung in a spotlight quickly. Let's put this back to frame 1, and I will insert a spotlight. I'm just going to go up to panels and look through selected. This will make this a little bit easier to aim. And let's find out which way our glass will be going. This way. Okay. Now I'm aiming this spotlight only for the shadows. So really, it's not going to add any light contribution to the scene. So I don't really need to worry about its placement too much, except for where the shadows are going to fall. So I'm going to go back in now, grab our lighting dome, and I'm going to turn off, under its render stats, receive shadows, because our light source is outside of our dome, so I want it to shine through the dome and hit the object. So we'll go back to our bookmark view. Whoops, wrong one. Actually, go back to our perspective camera would be a better idea. And now we come here. I want to take a look at the floor to see where our shadow is falling. And we don't have one because I forgot to turn shadows on for the light source. So I just need to select our light. I'll just go to the outliner and select the spotlight. Also, I want to turn off illuminates emit diffuse because I don't actually want the light contribution from this light. So I do want the shadow contribution, however. So down to shadows, and I'm going to be using a ray trace shadow. I'm going to use a light radius of 5 and 5 shadow rays just to soften up the shadow a tad. So we'll save this, we'll re-render. Okay, that's still not giving me a shadow. We'll just figure out what the problem is. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. What I've forgotten to do is I've forgotten to connect a mental ray light up to our light source, because we don't want to be dealing with the Maya spotlight. We want to be dealing with the mental ray one. So what I'll do is I'll open up our hypershade, which I think I left here. Go to lights, spotlight, graph network, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn this spotlight from a Maya spotlight to a mental ray spotlight. So to do this, I'll just select mental ray lights. I'll drop in a mental ray light spot node, select our spotlight, come over to here, scroll down, and under the Mental Ray tab, I'm going to add this by middle mouse dragging it to its light shader. This will now become a Mental Ray light, and you should now get the result we were after. Second, render settings, render editor, sorry. Okay, now we have a Mental Ray light. Now we get the shadow we're after. What I want to do though is just increase this cone angle a bit so it's not quite as obvious. Select the light again. Under cone angle, I'll set this to 60 and I'll set the penumbra angle to 40. So it's okay, and there we have it. We're starting to look a little bit more like glass. We'll deal with these quality issues we're having in a minute. I just want to get the basic shading and lighting done for a second. I'm going to turn off the, no, I'm not, primary visibility of our image-based lighting node. This won't affect the reflections and refractions, which is what we're using it for at the moment. So I need its render stats. And I'm just going to click off its primary visibility. I'll do a quick render. Okay, so we still have the reflections and refractions cast from the image-based lighting, but now we don't have to worry about it being in the background. So, right, next thing is we have the basic shading for the glass and a basic, very basic light setup at minimal quality, so we can do some fast test renders. I'm going to select all of our rings, and I'm just going to go to the hypershade. Excuse me, Maya seems to have gone a bit nuts on me. Okay, I am going to create a new material to assign to these. So in this case, I'm going to use a Mental Ray architectural material. There we go. I'm going to come here, and I'm actually just going to use one of the presets from the Mental Ray architectural material. In fact, I'll just rename this quickly to rings. And Mental Ray does have a copper preset that I'm going to use. As I probably mentioned before, we do have a basic shading tutorial, practical shading tutorial on the site, which will take you through the creation of glass, copper, chrome, all of these things, how to tweak them and how to make them a lot more realistic, as well as a basic overview of how Maya's shading nodes work. Okay, so we'll just, we'll select these again. Back to the hypershade. Actually, I'll just assign existing material this way. So assign existing material, material rings. There we go. And we'll do a quick render. Okay, there we have some fairly shiny rings. And again, I hope if you're following along with this tutorial, you do work a little bit on the materials here to get a nicer result than we're going to get here. And as I've said before, I don't want you to watch me tweak materials for 3.5 weeks. So this will be good enough for our purposes once we adjust the quality of the final gather and the global illumination contributions, as well as turn up the anti-aliasing. So for right now, I'll go back to our bookmark camera view, which would be here. We'll take this back to the start of the animation. We'll just play this until I get a shot I want. There's some rings bouncing past with the glass in the background. We'll do a quick render. Okay, I have some very shiny rings and what obviously looks like glass. What I would like to do, however, is get rid of this black background. So what I'm going to do in order to achieve that is just dip into our foreview. I will just grab what we're using as our ground plane here. I'm going to select the edges. So go into edge mode, select the top set of edges, put this onto move. Sorry. Yeah, select the top set of edges. Move this up here like so. Select this set of edges. I'll move this up here like so, and maybe a little bit more up here. Okay, and I'll also make our ground plane a little larger so it covers up this missing piece. Oops, back to object mode, pardon me. Okay, my Maya is definitely having some sort of fit. I'll just move this. In fact, no, I won't do anything with it. 1 second. Ah, there we go. Sorry about that. It's recording and working with Maya at the same time is a little CPU intensive, so I'll just move this stepped background we have here now and do another render. Okay, now we've got just a plain background with a little contrast to it, which can be kind of nice. So for the next thing, we're going to look at how to turn the final gather quality up, how to add some global illumination to speed up some render time, and the final shading and tweaking for this. So we'll go to render settings. Okay, and I'll turn on global illumination. This will actually speed up final gather. It will now calculate photon bounces for final gather. Again, these exact settings we're not going to cover in this tutorial, but I'm going to turn this up to 100. I'm going to leave everything else where it is, and we are just going to re-render this. So I'll save this for comparison. Okay, our render time with final gather turned to 100 for accuracy has actually gone from 12 seconds to 8, but we are getting a little more accuracy. We still have no anti-aliasing, but this is a little better to test render because we've eliminated a lot of the background blotchiness and things here. So first thing I'd like to do is work out when these rings stop coming past the camera. So around here I'd like to tilt the focus of the camera and start to zoom in on the glass. So I'll select the camera just by pushing this button here, and let's say around frame 90 we will set a keyframe for the camera. So I'll just actually press S to set the camera keyframe. Select the camera. Go to its channel box, select its translate and rotate attributes and key it. So now, okay, that's good. And I would like the camera to actually finish up in about this position with a close-up shot of glass and rings. So we'll go to frame 150 and we'll get this position back. We want something like this maybe. Okay, I'll just key this again. Okay, so we stay outwards while we watch the rings flash past, and then we start to go towards the camera. Okay, let's just do a test render of this final shot. Okay, for a test render, this is actually quite nice. I have my glass looking like glass. I still don't have the final gather contribution turned up high enough. Also, this seemed desperately in need of some anti-aliasing. Our background here is clipped, so I'll just resize it to make sure that it's not in the shot. And there's a few things we need to do to tidy up. So the first thing I'll do is actually resize our background plane here. Sorry, we seem to have got stuck again. One moment. Ah, there we go. So I'll just scale this up a little bit. I won't bother to take another test render. I know this will just have cut out the blackness here. What I will do, however, is just turn up our anti-aliasing. So under the quality tab, I will leave this on adapted sampling, but I'll move this to 1. I'm going to knock this down to 0.08, sorry, and re-render. Okay, as you can see, we got quite a bit more quality in this render with the anti-aliasing turned up and tweaking a few of the settings. I'm actually quite happy with the way these reflections and refractions are falling. I quite like the fact that we get the blue reflection from the sky in our HDR map. I actually like the placement of them. But if you do want to tweak them, remember you can we'll go to our outliner and we'll select our mental ray image-based lighting node. Back to our attribute editor, and I'll turn the rotate to say 180. And what this will do, this will move our image-based lighting around another 90 degrees. So I'll take a shot here and show you what happens. Okay, there's our render finished. I'm just going to flick backwards and forwards. As you can see, moving that image-based lighting node has dramatically altered the look of this scene. As this scene is at the moment 90% glass and basically a grey background, the reflections really are what's going to make this object pop out. So you're going to want to spend some time tweaking that. For me, I actually preferred the first look we got, so I'm going to put this rotation back to 90. Another thing I'd like to mention is this image as it is right now, it looks quite nice. It has a fairly good looking glass on it that rings are very shiny, which is what we set out to achieve. However, we have no depth of field. To illustrate this and what difference it can make to your scene, I'm going to select the camera and I'm going to drop in a mental ray physical depth of field node. I'm not going to use the one inbuilt here. So I'm going to go down to the mental ray tab, and under lens shader I'm going to select here. I am going to go to lenses and drop in the physical lens depth of field. Now, in order for this to work, we need to know how far away this object is from our camera. So I'm going to go up to display, heads up display, and I'm going to turn on object details. This is about 24 Maya units away from our camera. So we'll set the depth of field to be, say, slightly in front of that, so 22 units. And I'll set the radius to 10, which is quite a high value, but just so you can have a point of comparison, a point of reference, sorry. And we'll hit render. Okay, I've done this render. I've tweaked the values on the depth of field a little bit. You can see them here. And this, it gives our object more focus and it looks a little better. The problem is that this is a very low sample depth of field, which is why the quality's gone back to quite jagged again. It took 2 minutes and 3 seconds to render. Render with no depth of field took 45 seconds. If I was to get this to the kind of quality that I would be happy with, this would take around 10-12 minutes a frame to render with the depth of field. And as I'm going to be wanting depth of field on every single frame out of 150 frames, we are actually going to fake the depth of field using a luminance depth in After Effects after we've finished rendering out this tutorial. It'll give us a very similar effect at a hundredth of the time. I just wanted to show you guys this depth of field camera lens, so you can do this in Maya. If you don't have After Effects or you don't want to use it, it is possible to get the depth of field effect with just Maya, but it will take an awfully long time. Right, so I'll just disconnect this depth of field node from our camera. Let's break the connection. So really, I'm actually quite happy with this simple shot we have here. I'm just going to scrub through a few frames and we'll get a ring up close and personal. I'll just render this. And again, this type of shot is just begging for depth of field, really. You can focus it in several different places. You can bring this ring into sharp focus and blur everything else. What you're going to try and want to do with this animation is focus people's attention where you want it to be. And depth of field is an excellent way of doing this. Cinematography is it's his bread and butter. It really is. You can take the focus off the glass after it's fallen, and you can really concentrate the viewer to where you want to look. You can also hide some rendering mistakes with this. So in the next part of the tutorial, we're going to cover rendering out the animation. I'll show you how to do this with Maya's batch renderer. We're also going to cover adding our objects to a separate layer in order to a separate render layer, sorry, in order to render out a luminance depth that we can then take into After Effects and use as a way to fake this depth of field. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next part. Hi, welcome back to part 5 of this tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to cover adding some objects, well, our objects, our glass and our rings, to a render layer in Maya to render out a luminance depth. So just to recap where we left off, we've created a glass with the rings, as you know, and a simple camera animation to zoom us in after most of the rings have shot past. One thing I did forget in the last part is I just want to go up to the rendering settings and turn on caustics. This is just give us a little more blinginess to our glass. So now what we need to do first and foremost is grab the objects we want to assign to a new layer so we can do our luminance depth. So we will select all of our rings up here, and also our wine glass, because these are the objects we're going to want in the luminance depth. So in order to do this, we go to our channel box under render layers. I'm going to put this, which basically creates a new layer and assigns all the objects we've selected to it. So we'll select this layer 1. We'll call this layer, just rename this here, depth, so we know where we are, and we're going to want to assign a luminance depth to this. Now the easiest way to do this in Maya 2011 is go to the attributes under presets. It actually has a preset for you. What this has done is it's assigned a surface shader. I'll bring it up in the hypershade so we can have a better look. A second, my Maya's a little sluggish today. Okay, here we go. These have gone red because when we did this, it's rendering with Maya software. So these are red because these are meant array materials. It doesn't really matter, it's not important. So if we go to our graph network for our surface shader, what it's done is it's put a standard surface shader with a set range and a sampler info. And what this is going to attempt to do is objects in the back of the scene will be black and objects in the front will be white, various shades of grey in between. This is what we're going to use for our Z depth. However, if we render this now, you will see that everything is white. This hasn't really worked how we were expecting it to. We'll render it under mental ray, and again it's just not working the way we wanted to. Everything is white, so when we bring this depth layer into After Effects to fake depth of field, then this won't work because it won't be able to distinguish items in the foreground from items in the background. And this is because we're using a completely open scene, and Maya has tried to approximate our minimum and maximum range values for our objects in our scene. Now we know this is about 50 Maya units from the camera, and if we look at our material, just material attributes, we can see that Maya's got the maximum set to 10,000, which is far too high. So we're going to break the connections on these and set our own values. So we'll start out with a value of 1, and we'll go here. We know it's about 50 away, so we'll try 50, and we can immediately see again, even here in this shaded view, that this has gone white, this is black, and these seem to be better shades of grey. So let's have a look. Okay, yep, that's pretty much what we wanted. I mean, the darker the objects are, the further away they are. So what you're looking for here realistically is for, the back of the glass is completely black. So that would be completely out of focus if we use depth of field on this white object here, depending on our iris size. So what I want to do is I want to just tweak that a little bit. So here we go. I'm going to set this down to 40 and try again. Sorry, that's the wrong way round, of course. That's brought it more forward, so now the whole glass has disappeared. What I meant to do is set it up to 60, not down to 40. Excuse me. And up to 60. Try again. Okay, there we go. In fact, that might be a little much. 55, I think, will be the magic number for this one. Oh, that looks about perfect to me. The back of the glass is almost black. This object in the front is very white, and these two here in the middle are very grey. We'll just scrub another frame through to take another look at this when it's here. And After Effects has a very sensitive grey level for depth of field, so I would be able to focus in the depth of field on the rim of this glass while leaving the back of it out of focus. We'll go through this in a minute. Just scrub to the end frame to see our depth of field on the last shot when the camera is in its final position. And this is perfect. This will let us focus the final depth of field on these objects here while having this out of focus. So that's our Z depth layer calculated. Now all we need to do is render out our entire animation. So we'll go to our rendering menu here, and we'll first check the render settings. We need to make sure that we're rendering out not a single frame but multiple frames. For this, I'm actually going to use Maya's own if format. I know we have 150 frames, so I'll set this to 150. There's our, and everything here looks fine. We're going to be saving in my work folder. You can change this by going here and setting where you'd like to save your animation out to, but that looks fine for now. One thing of note is our final gather settings are still quite low for an animation, so if I go back to indirect lighting, I'm going to set the final gather settings up to 500. The accuracy, I am also going to turn on the final gather filter. I'm not going to go through exactly what this does here. There are many ways to tweak this. You can do the minimum maximum radius, and you can set this to optimize for animations, but again, this is pretty much outside the purview of this tutorial. I'm going to keep it simple, not go into too much detail. So this is, I know from experience, this will render this fine. So there you go, we're all set up here. We have our global illumination, our final gather. Caustics is now on. Okay, it all looks good. I'll just make sure we have a test render before we go and render 150 frames to make sure I'm on the master layer. Okay, we have our render completed. It's 1 minute 33 seconds per frame. It's gone up quite a bit because we've turned up our accuracy. And 1 minute 33 seconds per frame for this quality is not that high. I can live with it. So I'm going to now render out the animation, and to do this I'll make sure I'm in the rendering menu, and I'll go to render, batch render. Now as soon as I hit this, it will render out 150 frames of the master layer. Now take into consideration please that once you've rendered out the master layer, you'll also need to render out the depth layer. Fortunately, the depth layer takes a second a frame maybe. We'll just see that here. 3 seconds a frame. And for the depth layer, what I'm actually going to do is I don't want the anti-aliasing on the depth layer for various reasons. Also, it's going to slow it down. So I'm going to pull up the render settings. And you'll see it's render using mental rate. And this is orange because this is an override for this layer. So I don't need caustics, global illumination, final gather, and I don't want the anti-aliasing, so I'll leave that at 0, and I'll re-render the depth layer. And again, 1 second a frame, much faster, and again, go up to render, batch render, and that will then render out 150 frames of your depth layer here. Okay, I'll see you in the next part when you finish your rendering, and we'll be taking this to After Effects to clean it up a little bit, to do the post-processing and add the depth of field. Thanks for watching. Hi, welcome back. I just thought I'd record a small addendum to part 5, maybe for some of those of you who are not too familiar with batch rendering in Maya. I'd like to say that after you've rendered out your depth layer and you want to render out your master layer, you have to tick this to off and this to on. Or indeed, if you've rendered out your master layer and you want to render out your depth layer, you need to make sure one of these is on and one of them's off. So if we rendered our master layer, we'll turn it off, we'll turn this on, and then when we go to render, batch render, you'll see down here in a moment it will start rendering out our depth layer. Okay, there it goes. Now, as you can see, the depth layer is very fast, 16, 20, 21, 22. I will just let that complete. Okay, that finished in very short order. Now I need to turn this off and this on and go up to render, batch render. Okay, and that started, as you'll see, at a lot slower rate. The first frames will be quite quick because our glass object is far away, and as it comes towards the end of the process it will slow down quite a bit. Sorry about any confusion that might have caused you, and again, I'll see you in the next part for the After Effects processing. Hi, welcome back to the final part of this tutorial. As you can see, we're in After Effects for the final part. We're going to do some cleanup of our image and also add the depth of field. Now, if all's gone according to plan, you should now have your master layer rendered out, and you should also have your depth layer rendered out. So we're going to start by importing both of these layers into After Effects. So to do this, you can double click here. You can also go to Import, File, and here's my master layer and my depth layer. So I'll start by importing my depth layer, and I'm going to ignore the alpha channel. I'm not going to be using it. I'll just rename this to depth, and I'll click the name and drag it down here. Now we'll take a quick look at our depth layer. I'll scrub backwards and forwards through the timeline. As you can see, that rendered out perfectly well. So we'll import our master layer. Again, I'm going to ignore the alpha channel. Rename it master, and I'm going to drag it down here. Now the first thing we're going to do is take a quick look at our master layer. So I'll turn the visibility of the depth layer off, as we won't actually be using the depth layer After Effects lens filter. We'll be using it to calculate depth of field. So I'll just have a quick scrub through, and you should now have something that looks like this. I've also included my renders in the tutorial. If for some reason you didn't want to go through the process of rendering your own, you can also feel free to use mine. Okay, the first thing that strikes me about this, it's very grey. I mean, it's not too bad. We'll take a quick look at it. I'll just put this into a preview, and here we go. Get the nice rings, no depth of field yet, of course, and we end up with a fairly nice final result for the amount of time we've spent so far. So what I'm going to do is, in order to get rid of some of this grayness, I'm going to tint this image by going up to New, Adjustment Layer. This will put that kind of invisible layer on top of our other layers here, which will allow us to add some effects to it. And for this one, I'm going to go up to Effects. I'm going to go to color correction, sorry, forgotten where it was for a moment there, and go down to Photo Filter. Now, at the moment we have a kind of warmish color. I don't want to use this filter, I want to use a cool filter. This is a little too much. This is more the color I was looking for, but the intensity of it's too high, or density as it's called here. So I'll set that down to around 10, And this gives me a nice blue tint, which I think kind of matches the shadows, the reflections, sorry, that we have here. So again, we'll do another quick RAM-based preview. And I think that looks a lot better with the blue on it. Okay, now for the depth of field, which, again, as I said before, can really make or break an animation, because it's nice, but it's your eye is unfocused. You're not sure whether to focus on the glass behind, or the rings in the middle, or in the foreground. So we're really going to direct the user's eye where we want it to go with this depth of field. So we need another adjustment layer. So again, new adjustment layer. We'll go up to Effects, and you see in 3D channel depth of field. This is not what you're looking for. Don't be tempted to use it. This relies on a completely different technique than the one we're using. We're going to go down to Blur and Sharpen, and select a lens blur. Now you'll see the whole thing has gone blurry. This is because After Effects has no depth map layer, so it just blurs the whole thing. So what we'll do is we'll go down and select our depth as the depth map layer, and now everything is in focus, because here your blur focal distance is on the black and white image we use as our depth layer. So on this image, everything that's black is currently in focus. So I just turn that off a second. So if I set this to everything is white, 255 levels of grey, everything will be out of focus. Now to demonstrate this, I'll scrub this halfway through, and you can see these objects are more in focus now. If I wanted to focus in on this object here, well, it's around the midpoint, so we'll try 170-ish. And I have a sharp focus here, slightly less focus here, and less focus as we go back. Now, if I was to leave this and preview an entire animation with it, I'll show you what happens. I'll just pause while this calculates. Okay, our simulation finished, and this is what we have. Now, as you can see, as things approach the mid-distance around 170 levels of grey, which is almost whitish grey, things start to come into focus in mid-shot almost. So this has already made this animation a lot more interesting. Your eye immediately focuses more on the rings coming towards you and less on the glass. And again, as the glass comes towards the camera, the focal point aims there. But our aim with this is to actually animate this depth of field. So we'll take a look at how we're going to do that. Right. So we'll start with the glass, and really as the animation starts, I like people to see the glass in focus. So we'll move this back to black, which is everything on our adjustment layer is now in focus. We'll scrub this forward a bit. As the glass starts to fall, I'd actually like to take some of the back of the glass and the background out of focus and try and concentrate the focus around here. So we're going to need to move the blur distance up. So let's try a value of around 30. Okay, it's not quite high enough. Let's try 50. Okay, as you can see, our rim of our glass is now in focus, and some of these objects towards the front of the glass, and the base of the glass is starting to go out of focus, as well as the back of the glass. Now, in order to animate this, I'm going to make this a key, so add keyframe, and you can see this value will stay at 50. So what we need to do is go back to the start and yank it back to 0. Now, as we scrub through the timeline, you'll see this increase as we get nearer the point where it comes into focus. Okay, so we'll go to about halfway through our animation, and here the rings really start to come towards the front, towards the camera. So I'm going to move this value up until we have sharp focus on just this ring here. So around 130 we'll do it, and we'll take a scrub backwards. And you'll see we have this in sharp focus as we move. As we get further back, we have this in focus, and then the whole glass in focus. So what I'd like to do here is these objects are in focus at the moment. And as the camera starts to move, I'd like to shift the focus from the midground right back into the glass. So as the camera starts to move, I'm going to actually increase this value. And decrease this value. And that's a little too far. I'd like to focus on this as we move in. Okay, so this is in sharp focus. These have started to blur. Maybe a little less. Okay, and then at the end of our animation, these should be in sharp focus. So I'll move this up. Okay, so the back of our glass is blurry and these are in sharp focus. Now, I would like this effect to be more pronounced, so I'm going to change the iris radius here to something more like 5. Something more like 25. Okay, and our effect has become much more pronounced. This is now much blurrier. I'll set a keyframe for the iris radius. Okay, there we go. You just have to click on it. And as I scrub backwards, the iris radius will stay at 25. So if we get here, you can see this is a little too much. So I want to animate this iris radius over time. So I want to go back to the first frame and set the iris radius to 5. Okay, and we'll scrub through to take a look at this. And I have my depth of field pretty much where I want it. Let's scrub halfway through. Okay, I have my depth of field here. And now it starts to come to the back here. This might need a little tweaking. What we'll do a quick preview. So I will just preview this. Okay, so it's just about to finish calculating and I'll show you the effect we have. Okay, you can see our depth of field kick in. This is not quite the effect I was looking for. We're going to need to tweak this a little bit. Then you'll notice a nasty grey box appear around the outside here. So we're going to go back and we're going to tweak this a little bit. We're going to get rid of this grey box effect, and we're also going to focus the depth of field so it's more on the objects coming towards the fore. So I'll just escape out of this. And to get rid of the nasty grey box, all you need to do is click Repeat Edge Pixels. So click Repeat Edge Pixels, and as we scrub through now, you'll see no nasty box. What I'd like to do is get us here, where we're only at 124, and bring us up maybe to 180. Okay, now we start to get more focus here. Okay, we have focus. So we scrub through. And again, this needs to go up even more now, maybe. Okay, we have sharp focus. As we go towards the glass, I'd like to focus more on this. So we're going to need to pull this forward again. Okay. And by the time we get to the end of our animation, our aperture size is larger, so we have a more blurred effect towards the back of the glass. To tweak this a little bit, maybe just to bring this more into sharp focus. Okay, down a little. Okay, and this is all a question of moving this around until you get something you're happy with. So you might want to tweak it slightly different to your tastes. So what I'll do now is I'll go in and do another RAM preview so we can see what we have. Okay, our simulation is about to finish here, and remember the idea of this is to keep the viewer focused on the moving rings and then to bring sharp focus to the final shot at the end. So we'll see what we've got. Okay, very happy with that. Okay, I could probably spend quite a lot longer tweaking this, to make it perfect, but I think you'll get the general gist of what we've done with the depth of field and how we've used the luminance depth that we rendered out from Maya. So now we just need to save this out as an AVI, which I'll take you through the process of now. Okay, in order to save out our AVI, we're just going to go up to Composition. We're going to go to Make Movie. This will take us to the render queue, and the settings at the moment are pretty much what I'm looking for. I'm going to output this to a lossless AVI, so I'll just select where it outputs to by clicking on it under our practical shading here, which is where I'm going to save it. I'm just going to save this as final AVI, and as soon as I hit return or click save, After Effects will start to render this out. Okay, as you can see, it's beginning the process here, and then with my lossless AVI I can take this into an encoding program and encode it for the web or for YouTube or whatever else I might want to do with it. So that concludes this tutorial. I hope you found it useful, and I will see you again.